He called her his everything, then paraded his nothing in front of everyone. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Patricia Chatsworth, a woman who had it all: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a wardrobe filled with haute couture, and a billionaire husband, Sibylla Pearce, who worshipped the ground she walked on. Or so she thought. At the city's most prestigious charity gala, with the flash of paparazzi cameras lighting up her Dior gown and the secret of their first child blooming within her, Sibylla shattered their perfect world. He introduced his mistress to society, leaving a pregnant Patricia to crumble in the most public way imaginable. But from those ashes, a new woman would rise. This is the story of how a betrayed wife returned not for revenge, but to build an empire that would make her husband's fortune look like pocket change. Life for Patricia Chatsworth Pearce was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their home, a sprawling duplex on the 75th floor of 157, wasn't just an apartment, it was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a kingdom over which her husband, Sibylla Pearce, reigned. Sibylla, the CEO of Pearce Global Properties, was a man carved from ambition and granite. He had inherited a respectable real estate firm, and with a ruthless blend of charisma and cunning, transformed it into an international behemoth. Patricia was his perfect counterpart. With a master's degree in art history from the Sorbonne, she possessed a quiet elegance that Sibylla's new money desperately craved. She wasn't just a beautiful accessory. She was the curator of their life, transforming their cold modern spaces into warm, sophisticated homes filled with carefully chosen art. She advised him on acquisitions for the corporate collection and charmed his investors with her intellect and grace. She was in every sense his partner. Their 5th anniversary was approaching, and with it the annual Metropolitan Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the New York social calendar. This year was different. Patricia held a secret she'd been cherishing for 8 weeks, a secret she planned to reveal to Sibylla in a beautifully wrapped box after the gala, a pair of tiny cashmere booties. She was pregnant. Their child, the true heir to the Pearce empire, was on the way. The evening of the gala, the air in the penthouse buzzed with anticipation. Patricia stood before the mirror, her reflection shimmering in a custom-made navy silk gown by Schiaparelli. The fabric clung to her frame, subtly hinting at the new life she carried. Sibylla entered the dressing room already in his tuxedo. Perfect, Patty. Absolutely perfect, he said, his voice a low hum of approval. He clasped a diamond necklace around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. The necklace was the Lumière de Cascade, a breathtaking piece from Harry Winston he'd bought at a Sotheby's auction. A queen needs her crown jewels. She smiled, her heart fluttering. It's beautiful, Sibylla. Thank you. He kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. Lately his touches had felt that way, gestures meant for an audience, even when they were alone. There had been late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into his study to take, and a new, uncharacteristic scent of a different perfume, a sharp, cloying gardenia that sometimes clung to his suits. She had pushed the thoughts away, blaming her own nascent pregnancy hormones for her unease. Sibylla was a busy man. This was the price of their life. The gala was a chaotic symphony of wealth and power. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as they stepped from their black Bentley. Patricia smiled, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen, a gesture no one but she understood. Inside the grand hall was a sea of designer gowns and hushed gossip. They held court at their table, a prime spot near the stage, accepting congratulations on a recent skyscraper deal in Dubai. to my brilliant wife, Patricia Sibylla, said, raising his glass of champagne in a toast to their table guests. The soul of our home, and the heart of my life. Patricia's cheeks flushed with pleasure. The doubts that had pricked at her conscience melted away under the warmth of his public adoration. This was her husband. This was their life. The first crack in her perfect world appeared an hour later. Sibylla excused himself to network. Patricia was engaged in a conversation with the elderly Mrs. Rothschild about a new Monet exhibition when a ripple of silence spread from the grand entrance. Heads turned, whispers followed. Standing there, bathed in the archway's light, was a woman who was Patricia's complete opposite. She was sharp angles where Patricia was soft curves, her platinum blonde hair cut in a severe geometric bob. She wore a blood-red Alexander McQueen dress that looked less like a gown and more like beautiful, dangerous armor. Her name was Kendra Lowe, a ruthless up-and-comer in the world of venture capital, known for her aggressive takeovers and even more aggressive social climbing. And walking toward her, his hand outstretched, was Sibylla. Patricia watched a cold knot forming in her stomach as Sibylla took Kendra's hand. He didn't just greet her, he possessed her, his hand sliding from her fingers to the small of her back. He guided her through the crowd, not towards a peripheral group, but directly towards the center of the room, towards their table. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They stopped a few feet from where Patricia sat, frozen. The world seemed to narrow to this single horrific tableau. Patricia Sibylla's voice was smooth, but his eyes were like chips of ice. I'd like you to meet Kendra Lowe. Kendra is a very important new partner for the company. Kendra's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. It didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes, which flickered over Patricia's gown her diamonds, and then with a flicker of triumphant disdain, seemed to linger for a moment on her stomach. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman behind the man, Kendra said, her voice a purr. The emphasis on behind was a deliberate, poisoned dart. Patricia couldn't speak. The air had been sucked from her lungs. This wasn't a business introduction. The way he held her, the proprietary gleam in his eye, the way the entire room was holding its collective breath, this was a declaration. He hadn't just brought his mistress to the gala. He was presenting her, flaunting her. A well-known society columnist, Brenda Maxwell, sidled up to their table, her pen poised. Sibylla. A bold move. Is Pierce Global Properties expanding into venture capital? Sibylla's smile widened. He pulled Kendra closer. His hand splayed possessively on her hip. Pierce Global is always expanding. We're moving into a new era, a more dynamic future. The subtext was a sledgehammer. Patricia was the past. This woman was the future. The room was spinning. The faces of her friends and acquaintances were a blur of pity shock and morbid curiosity. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her reaction. She felt the delicate life inside her, a secret that was supposed to be a joyous gift, now felt like a lead weight in her womb. She rose from her chair, her legs trembling. Sibylla. She whispered, her voice barely audible. May I have a word with you in private? He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a minor inconvenience. We're a little busy right now, Patricia. Why don't you go get some air? It was the dismissal that broke her. Not the affair, but the casual public cruelty of it. He had taken their life, their marriage, and set it on fire in front of the entire world, and he didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye while it burned. She turned her Schiaparelli gown, feeling like a shroud, and walked away from the table. She didn't run. She walked with a dignity she didn't feel, past the staring faces, past the whispers that followed her like a trail of smoke. Each step was an agony. The flash of a camera went off in her face, and in that blinding white light, she saw her future a ruin. She didn't stop until she reached the cold marble of the ladies' lounge. Leaning against the sink, she stared at her reflection. The diamonds around her neck felt like a slave's collar. Her perfect face was a mask of horror. And as the first sob tore through her, a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, a terrifying premonition of all the things she was about to lose. The Bentley ride back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Patricia sat pressed against the far door, the plush leather feeling cold and alien. Sibylla sat beside her, radiating a chilling indifference. He scrolled through his phone, a small triumphant smile playing on his lips as notifications likely poured in about his dramatic social coup. He hadn't just launched a new business partnership, he had launched a new public identity, and he had used his wife's humiliation as the runway. When the car door opened, in the sterile silence of their private garage, Patricia moved on autopilot. She walked into the elevator, her gaze fixed on the polished steel doors, refusing to look at him. The cramping in her belly was a dull, persistent ache, now a drumbeat of dread. Inside the penthouse, the magnificent view of the city skyline seemed to mock her. A kingdom she no longer had a place in. What was that, Sibylla? Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual melodic tone. He finally looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild irritation. What was what, Patty? It was business. You're being hysterical. Hysterical. The word, so dismissive, so patronizing, cracked something open inside her. You brought that woman, your mistress, to the most public event of the year. You stood her next to me. You humiliated me in front of every person we know. He shrugged, walking to the bar and pouring himself a whiskey. Kendra is not just a mistress. She's a formidable asset. Her firm is backing our new Tech City project in Austin. It was a strategic announcement. A strategic announcement, she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. You announced your affair as if it were a quarterly earnings report. Don't be so naive, he sneered, turning to face her, the amber liquid swirling in his glass. This is how the world works. We had become stale, predictable. People respect power, Patty. Boldness. What I did tonight, that was power. It's got everyone talking. The Pierce Global stock will probably jump 5 points tomorrow on the buzz alone. Patricia stared at him, truly seeing the man she had married for the first time. The charming, ambitious man she had fallen in love with was a facade. Beneath it was this, a cold reptilian creature who saw human beings as assets and liabilities. And tonight, she had been reclassified as a liability. And what about me? What about our marriage? She whispered, the fight draining out of her. The marriage served its purpose, he said, with brutal finality. You gave me class. You curated a beautiful life. But I've outgrown it. I need someone who can play in the big leagues, not just pick out curtains and paintings. The insult was designed to gut her, to reduce her entire contribution to their life to domestic fluff. It worked. She felt hollowed out, worthless. And then she remembered the secret she still held. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered within her. Maybe this would change things. Maybe the reality of a child would pierce through his monstrous ego. Sibylla. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the vast, silent room. He stopped swirling his drink. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, maybe even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. Well, that is Inconvenient timing. Inconvenient. Her heart, already shattered, seemed to disintegrate into dust. Their child was an inconvenience. "We'll handle it," he continued, his tone chillingly practical. "My lawyers will draft a generous severance for you. An NDA, of course. We'll set you up in a nice apartment, maybe back in California, near your brother. You can have the baby quietly. A trust will be established. No one needs to know it's mine. It would complicate the narrative with Kendra." He was erasing them. With a few calculated sentences, he was writing her and their unborn child out of his life story. The cramp in her abdomen suddenly intensified, sharp and vicious. She gasped, doubling over and clutching her stomach. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Sibylla. She breathed a new terror, eclipsing everything else. Something's wrong. He looked at her with detached annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic, Patricia. It's a classic move. Don't think some phantom pain is going to make me change my mind. No, you don't understand." She gasped, leaning against a marble column for support. A terrifying warmth was spreading through her. "I think I'm bleeding." He just stared. There was no concern in his eyes, no rush to help. There was only suspicion, as if her physical agony was just another negotiation tactic. That was the moment Patricia Chatsworth Pierce died. In her place, something harder, something colder began to form. She looked at the man she had loved, the father of the child she was now losing, and saw nothing but a monster. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself off the column. "Get out!" she rasped. "This is my house, Patricia. Get out!" Her voice was a low growl, filled with a venom that surprised them both. She ignored the pain, her entire being focused into a laser of pure hatred. "If you are not out of this apartment in 5 minutes, I will call Brenda Maxwell myself and give her a story that will make your strategic announcement look like a fairy tale. I will tell her and every other reporter in this city about the child you're abandoning. Your stock won't jump 5 points. It will plummet 50. For the first time that night, she saw fear in his eyes. Not for her, not for their child, but for his company, for his reputation, the narrative. He set his glass down. "Fine. Have your tantrum. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He turned and walked out of the penthouse and out of her life without a single backward glance. The moment the door clicked shut, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the cold marble floor, the world dissolving into a vortex of pain and grief. Her hand came away sticky and red. Her baby. Their baby. Gone. Lost in the wreckage of a life that had been a beautiful lie. Lying there alone in the gilded cage she had built, Patricia Chatsworth didn't just cry. She mourned the death of her child, her husband, and the woman she used to be. The night was not just an ending. It was a brutal, agonizing annihilation. The first few weeks were a blur of grey. Patricia didn't stay in the penthouse. She couldn't. Every polished surface, every piece of art she had so lovingly placed was tainted by Sibylla's betrayal. The moment she was physically able, she packed a single suitcase and fled, leaving behind the diamonds, the couture and the ghost of her former life. Her brother Leo Chatsworth was her savior. A pragmatic, no-nonsense corporate lawyer based in San Francisco, he flew to New York the moment he heard her broken voice on the phone. He didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. He offered action. He installed her in a discreet, serviced apartment at the Carlyle, handled the initial venomous communications from Sibylla's legal team, and simply sat with her in the silence, a solid, unwavering presence against the storm. "He's offering a settlement," Patty Leo said one afternoon, looking through a thick legal document. "It's generous, as he puts it. 7 figures an apartment in Tribeca, contingent on a lifelong non-disclosure agreement that's so restrictive you wouldn't be able to tell our own mother his favorite color. Patricia, who had been staring blankly at the rain-streaked window, turned to him. The listlessness that had clouded her eyes for weeks was gone, replaced by a flicker of hard, cold fire. "Tell them to take their offer and burn it," she said, her voice flat. "I don't want his blood money. I don't want anything from him. I want him erased from my life." Leo raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There she is," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." That was the turning point. Grief was a cold, heavy cloak, but beneath it anger was a furnace. The miscarriage had devastated her, carving a permanent hole in her soul, but it had also cauterized the wound of her love for Sibylla. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn but the child. The man was dead to her. She refused his settlement. Leo, using his legal prowess, negotiated a simple, clean divorce. Sibylla, eager to clear the way for his new life with Kendra and avoid any public messiness, agreed. Patricia asked for only two things: her maiden name back and a small portfolio of art she had personally acquired before the marriage pieces she'd bought with her own inheritance from their grandmother. It was a pittance to a man like Sibylla, and he signed off on it without a second thought. With the divorce finalized, Patricia Chatsworth sold the art. The pieces, a few minor impressionist sketches, and a promising contemporary sculpture, fetched nearly $500,000. It wasn't billionaire wealth, but it was hers. It was a start. And with that money, she bought a one-way ticket to the only place that had ever felt like her own sanctuary, Paris. She didn't rent a chic apartment in Saint-Germain. She found a small, dusty flat on the top floor of a building in Le Marais, with a leaky skylight and a view of 1,000 crooked rooftops. The city wasn't a playground for her anymore. It was a workshop. She poured her energy not into social events, but into her original passion, art restoration. She remembered a name from her time at the Sorbonne, Antoine Dubois, a legendary art restorer who ran a small, exclusive workshop. He was a purist, an old master who worked with museums and private collectors who valued skill over speed. She called him her French fluent but rusty and asked for a meeting. Dubois' workshop was a cavern of wonders, smelling of linseed oil, turpentine, and old canvas. Canvases in various states of repair leaned against the walls like weary soldiers. Dubois himself was a small man with kind, tired eyes and hands stained with a century of pigments. He listened patiently as Patricia, not as the former Mrs. Pierce, but as a humble art historian, explained her skills and her desire to learn the physical craft of restoration. He was skeptical. "This is not a glamorous hobby, Mademoiselle Chatsworth. It is patient, painstaking work. It is dust and chemicals, and hours spent staring at a single square centimetre of cracked paint." "I'm not looking for glamour, Monsieur Dubois," she replied, her gaze steady. "I'm looking for work." He tested her. He gave her a small, forgotten 18th century portrait, marred by a clumsy Victorian-era varnish that had yellowed and obscured the delicate brushwork beneath. For weeks, Patricia worked in a quiet corner of his studio. She arrived before his other apprentices and left long after they were gone. She immersed herself in the science of solvents, the delicate art of inpainting. The intense microscopic focus required was a balm to her fractured mind. While she meticulously removed the discolored varnish, she felt as if she were also stripping away the layers of her old life, revealing the stronger substance underneath. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth chill of diamond necklaces, were now chapped and stained. She traded her designer heels for practical flats and her gala gowns for a simple work smock. and slowly she began to heal. One evening, Dubois stood behind her, watching as she applied a final protective layer to the restored portrait. The subject's face, once hidden behind a yellow fog, now shone with life, the artist's original, vibrant colors resurrected. "You have the touch, mademoiselle," he said, his voice filled with quiet respect. Not just the knowledge, but the patience, the soul of an artist. That praise meant more to her than all of Sibylla's empty compliments about her beauty. It was validation of her skill, of herself. Dubois began giving her more important projects. Her reputation within the small, cloistered world of European art restoration began to grow. She was known for her meticulous research, her delicate hand, and her uncanny ability to understand an artist's original intent. 2 years after her arrival in Paris, Patricia was working on a commission from a Belgian museum when she realized her period was late. A cautious, terrifying hope bloomed in her chest. A visit to a discreet doctor on the Rue de Rivoli confirmed it. She was pregnant. There had been a brief, gentle affair with a kind university professor who saw her for who she was not, who she had been married to. It had ended amicably when he'd taken a post in another country, but he had left her with the one thing she thought she had lost forever. This time there was no billionaire husband, no penthouse, no public announcement. There was only Patricia in her small Parisian flat, with her own hard-earned money and a future she was building with her own 2 hands. She placed a hand on her stomach, and for the first time since that horrible night, she felt a profound, unadulterated joy. This child would not be an heir to a cold empire. This child would be hers, her motivation, her masterpiece. She would name her Rosalind, a name that meant beautiful rose, a flower that could grow and thrive from the rubble. The next 5 years were a whirlwind of quiet, relentless construction. Patricia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful daughter, Rosalind, a child with her mother's thoughtful grey eyes and a spirit of pure sunshine. Motherhood redefined Patricia's ambition. It was no longer fueled by the bitter ashes of revenge, but by the fierce protective fire of a parent's love. She was not just rebuilding a life for herself. She was building a fortress for her daughter. She founded her own company, Chatsworth Restoration. Operating initially out of a larger studio space she leased near the Place des Vosges, she hired 2 of the best apprentices from Dubois' workshop. Antoine Dubois, now semi-retired, acted as her mentor and occasionally consulted on challenging projects, his revered name lending her fledgling company immediate credibility. Chatsworth Restoration became known for a niche expertise, identifying and restoring sleepers' paintings of immense value that had been misattributed or forgotten, hidden under layers of grime and neglect in dusty private collections and provincial auction houses. Patricia combined her academic knowledge with her hands-on skill. She would spend weeks in libraries and archives, tracing the provenance of a piece before ever touching a solvent to its surface. Her breakthrough came in her 3rd year of business. She was contacted by a Spanish family, the de Vegas, whose ancestors had been patrons of the arts. They had a large, dark painting of Venus that had been hanging in a drafty corridor of their ancestral castle for 200 years. It was attributed to a minor student of Velázquez and was considered largely worthless. They wanted it cleaned simply for sentimental reasons. When the painting arrived at her Paris studio, Patricia felt a familiar thrill. The composition was clumsy in parts, but the way the light fell on the subject's skin, the masterful rendering of the velvet drapery, it felt different, important. For 6 months, she and her team worked. They ran pigment analysis, X-rayed the canvas, and spent 1,000 hours on the restoration. As they painstakingly removed the dark, heavy overpainting, From a 19th-century modesty campaign, they uncovered the original breathtaking brushwork beneath. And in a corner, hidden under a layer of brown paint, they found a faint, looping signature. It wasn't a student's. It was the signature of Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the most celebrated and fiercely independent female artists of the Baroque period. It was a lost masterpiece, the Sleeping Venus of De Vega. The art world erupted. The discovery was the subject of front-page articles in Le Monde, The Times of London, and La Repubblica. When the painting was authenticated and went to auction at Christie's in London, it sold for a staggering $32 million. As part of her contract, Patricia had negotiated a percentage of the sale price as her fee, a common practice for high-stakes restoration discoveries. Overnight, Patricia Chatsworth was not just a respected restorer. She was a millionaire. A self-made millionaire. The story was irresistible. The brilliant art historian, the hidden masterpiece, the woman who had built her own success from nothing. She was featured in Forbes magazine's Europe's 30 Under 30. Even though she was in her early 30s, they made an exception for the compelling narrative. The article mentioned she was American, but barely touched on her past life in New York, framing her as a quintessential Parisian success story. Patricia used the money not for luxuries but for expansion. She diversified, adding art curation and investment consultation to her business services. She became a trusted advisor for a new generation of wealthy tech entrepreneurs and old money families who wanted to build collections with meaning and value. Her company, now rebranded as the Chatsworth Art Group, opened a small chic office in Geneva to handle the financial side of the business. She and Rosalind lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. They had a beautiful apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis with a view of the Seine. Rosalind attended a small private bilingual school. Their life was filled with museum visits, picnics in the Jardin du Luxembourg, and the comforting familiar scent of oil paint and old books. Patricia had found more than success. She had found peace. But as her European empire grew, she knew a crucial piece was missing. The heart of the global art market, the city with the wealthiest and most ambitious collectors, was still New York. To truly cement her legacy and take her company to the next level, she had to go back. She had to plant her flag in the very city that had cast her out. The decision was terrifying. It meant returning to the scene of her greatest humiliation. It meant the possibility of running into Sibylla. But looking at her daughter now, a bright, curious 5-year-old Patricia knew she couldn't let fear dictate their future. She wouldn't let Sibylla Pierce have the power to keep her exiled from her own home country. She made the call to a commercial real estate agent in Manhattan. She wasn't looking for a small office. She was looking for a flagship gallery space. A statement. She found the perfect location, a multi-level light-filled building in Soho that had once been an ironworks factory. As the contracts were signed and the plans for the grand opening began, the New York media caught wind of the story. Parisian art prodigy Patricia Chatsworth to open Soho Gallery read a headline in the New York Times style section. The article praised her European success, her famous Gentileschi discovery, and her formidable reputation. It was accompanied by a recent photo of her confident, elegant, and looking directly at the camera with an unreadable, powerful gaze. In his Park Avenue office, Sibylla Pierce read the article, the newspaper rattling in his hand. The photo was of a woman he barely recognized. The soft, accommodating girl he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable stranger, Patricia Chatsworth. He noted with a jolt that she had taken back her maiden name. He scrolled through photos of her, online pictures of her speaking at conferences in Zurich, cutting the ribbon on a museum wing she had helped curate in Amsterdam. Then he saw a photo of her in a park, laughing with a small, dark-haired girl, a girl who would be about 5 years old. A cold, unfamiliar feeling, a mixture of shock, regret, and a strange possessive anger began to twist in his gut. His discarded asset had somehow impossibly become a blue-chip stock. And she was coming back. The return to New York was a meticulously planned invasion. Patricia didn't slip back into the city. She arrived. She purchased a stunning brownstone in the West Village, a world away from the cold glass tower she had once called home. It was a house with character, with a garden for Rosalind to play in, filled with the art and books that defined their life, not a husband's status. The renovation of the Soho Gallery was her primary focus. For 6 months, she was a whirlwind of focused energy. She flew in architects from Italy and lighting designers from Stockholm. The space was transformed into a modern temple of art with soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors, and walls of brilliant white. It was named simply Chatsworth. The news of the gallery's impending launch party sent shock waves through the city's elite. It wasn't just another gallery opening. It was an event. The return of Patricia Chatsworth was a story too juicy to ignore. Whispers swirled in the same circles that had watched her fall apart 5 years ago. They remembered the humiliated wife fleeing the Metropolitan Foundation Gala. Now they were reading about the self-made millionaire, the art world powerhouse who had conquered Europe. The cognitive dissonance was intoxicating. Invitations to the Chatsworth opening became the most coveted social currency of the season. Patricia curated the opening exhibition herself. It was titled Resurgence, a collection of works by contemporary female artists who explored themes of transformation, strength, and the reclamation of narrative. The centerpiece was a magnificent large-scale abstract painting by a celebrated Japanese artist, full of bold, explosive color, breaking free from a dark, fractured background. It was a statement of intent. The night of the opening, Patricia stood on the gallery's mezzanine level, looking down at the arriving crowd. She wore a tailored emerald green jumpsuit by Roland Mouret, powerful, sleek, and utterly modern. Her hair was cut in a chic, shoulder-length style, and her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond studs. She was not the girl in the Schiaparelli ball gown. She was the woman who owned the building. Her brother Leo was by her side, a proud grin on his face. "You did it, Patty," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling at him. "I couldn't have survived that first week without you." "Yeah, well, I just held the door. You're the one who built the damn castle." The gallery filled with a glittering mix of artists, collectors, museum curators, and the inevitable society figures, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of their hostess. Patricia descended the floating steel staircase, moving through the crowd with an easy, confident grace. She greeted people warmly, discussing the art with passion and expertise. She was in her element, in complete control. And then she felt a shift in the room's energy. A familiar, cold dread, the ghost of a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She looked toward the entrance. Sibylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe had arrived. Sibylla looked much the same, his tailored suit still impeccable, but there were fine lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Kendra was draped in a silver sequined dress, her expression a mixture of defiance and curiosity. They were a power couple, but tonight they felt like intruders in someone else's kingdom. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Patricia saw a flicker of shock in Sibylla's gaze, a raw disbelief that the composed, powerful woman before him was the same broken girl he had dismissed 5 years ago. He had expected to see a survivor. He was not prepared for a conqueror. Kendra's smile was tight, her eyes sweeping over the gallery with an appraising, competitive glare. She saw the sheer scale of Patricia's success, the genuine respect she commanded from the city's cultural elite, and the mask of smug superiority slipped for just a moment. Patricia didn't falter. She didn't hide. She ended her conversation with the director of the MoMA and began to walk calmly and deliberately toward them. The crowd seemed to part for her, the ambient chatter dimming as people sensed the impending collision. This was the moment she had both dreaded and, on some level, prepared for. This was the test. She stopped a respectable distance from them, her posture perfect, her expression serene. "Sibylla, Ms. Lowe," she said, her voice cool and even. "Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the exhibition." Her use of Ms. Lowe was a subtle but sharp jab. After all these years, they weren't married. The great love affair that had destroyed her marriage hadn't culminated in the ultimate partnership after all. She saw the slight wince in Kendra's expression. Sibylla recovered, first slipping into his old charming facade. "Patricia, it's incredible. What you've accomplished. We've been following your success. It's truly remarkable." "I've been busy," she replied, a simple statement of fact that held a universe of meaning. "We should talk," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Catch up. There's a lot to discuss." Patricia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I don't believe there is, Sibylla. Everything that ever needed to be said between us was said 5 years ago in this city. This gallery this evening, this is a new conversation, and it has nothing to do with you." She held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the finality of her words sink in. There was no anger in her eyes, no pain. There was something far more devastating indifference. She had not only survived him, she had rendered him irrelevant. Without waiting for a reply, she gave them a polite, dismissive nod and turned away, moving deeper into the heart of her gallery, her world. She left them standing at the entrance, 2 ghosts from a past she had fully and finally transcended. The Queen had returned to her city, not to reclaim an old throne, but to unveil a new one built entirely by her own hands. The gallery opening was a triumph. The next morning, Patricia's face was on the cover of every society and arts journal in the city. Chatsworth's resurgence, a triumphant return, was the headline in Women's Wear Daily. The focus was on her business acumen, her artistic eye, and the sheer force of her will. The encounter with Sibylla and Kendra was relegated to a single delicious sentence in Brenda Maxwell's gossip column. Sibylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe made a brief appearance, looking like relics from a bygone era, in the gleaming new world of Patricia Chatsworth. For Sibylla, that sentence was a paper cut that festered into a gaping wound. The world he had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. The dynamic future he had promised with Kendra had not materialized as planned. Their aggressive venture capital projects had yielded a few early successes, but several high-risk tech investments had recently collapsed, costing Pierce Global Properties hundreds of millions. His reputation for ruthless genius was being re-evaluated as reckless gambling. The old guard of New York real estate men he had once scorned now whispered that he had lost his touch, distracted by his flashy, high-maintenance partner. His relationship with Kendra was a constant power struggle. The passion had cooled into a transactional partnership. They were bound not by love, but by a shared, desperate need to maintain an image of success. Kendra, who had seen Sibylla as her rocket to the stratosphere, was growing resentful as his trajectory began to plateau. Patricia's return threw their precarious situation into stark relief. She wasn't just a successful ex-wife. She was a symbol of a different kind of power, one built on substance taste and genuine creation, not just leveraged assets and hostile takeovers. She made them look cheap, Driven by a mixture of desperation and a bruised ego, Sibylla began trying to force his way back into her orbit. He started with a massive floral arrangement sent to the gallery, a gaudy explosion of orchids and lilies with a simple card, "Congratulations, let's have dinner." D. Patricia instructed her assistant to donate the flowers to a local hospital and to throw the card in the trash. Next, he tried a professional angle. A formal letter arrived from his legal team proposing a partnership. Pierce Global Properties was developing a new luxury residential tower on the Hudson Yards and wanted to commission the Chatsworth Art Group to curate the building's entire art collection from the lobby to the penthouse suites. It was a multi-million-dollar contract, an offer most firms would have killed for. Patricia read the proposal in her office, a calm, sunlit room overlooking the gallery floor. She recognized the strategy immediately. It wasn't about the art. It was about associating his brand with hers. It was about him buying back a piece of the credibility he had lost. It was about control. She dictated a polite but firm refusal to her assistant. The Chatsworth Art Group's current project schedule does not allow for any new large-scale commissions at this time. We wish Pierce Global Properties the best in their search for a suitable partner. The message was clear. She didn't need his money or his projects. His attempts grew more personal, more desperate. One afternoon, while Patricia and Rosalind were getting ice cream at a small shop near their home in the West Village, Sibylla happened to be walking by. "Patty fancy seeing you here," he said, his smile forced. Patricia's body went rigid. She instinctively put a protective arm around Rosalind, who was focused on her chocolate fudge scoop. "Sibylla," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. His eyes fell on Rosalind. He stared at the little girl, at her dark hair and serious grey eyes, her eyes. A complex emotion flickered across his face, curiosity, regret, and something that looked disturbingly like ownership. "This must be," he started, his voice softening. "This must be Rosalind." "Her name is Rosalind." "Yes," Patricia said, her tone a clear warning. "And we're just leaving." "She's beautiful, Patty," he said, his gaze fixed on the child. She has your eyes." He was trying to build a bridge to create a connection where none existed. He had forfeited the right to this child, to this life 5 years ago on a cold marble floor. "My daughter and I have a class to get to," Patricia said, her voice like steel. She took Rosalind's hand, dropped a $20 bill on the counter without waiting for change, and guided her daughter out of the shop, walking past Sibylla as if he were a lamppost. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on them, a burning, possessive gaze that made her skin crawl. That night she called Leo. "He's not giving up, Leo." He approached Rosalind. "That son of a bitch," Leo swore. "Don't worry, I'll handle it. I'll send his lawyers a letter so clear it will singe their eyebrows. He has no parental rights. He signed them away. One more unsolicited approach, and we'll file for a restraining order." The legal threat worked for a time, but Sibylla's desperation was reaching a tipping point. And then Patricia discovered a secret that would give her the ultimate, final checkmate. She was in the process of acquiring a small private art collection from the estate of a recently deceased hedge fund manager. As part of her due diligence, she was going through the provenance records for each piece. One painting in particular, a beautiful landscape from the Hudson River School, caught her eye. As she traced its ownership history back through the decades, she saw a familiar name. The painting had been sold in the late 1990s from the estate of Alistair Pierce, Sibylla's grandfather. Her curiosity piqued. She started cross-referencing other pieces from the collection. She spent a week digging through auction records and private sales archives. A shocking picture began to emerge. The hedge fund manager had acquired nearly a dozen significant pieces that were once the core of the original Pierce family collection. This was the old money art, the foundation of the family's cultural legacy. She remembered Sibylla bragging about how his grandfather had been a great collector. Why would these pieces be sold off? She made a call to a trusted contact, an older art dealer who knew all the city's secrets. The dealer's story was damning. "Oh, the Pierce collection," he'd said with a sigh. "A tragedy. Young Sibylla sold it all off about 10-15 years ago. He needed liquidity for some high-risk commercial real estate venture in Asia. He gutted his family's legacy for a quick cash infusion. He thought paintings on a wall were dead money. Most of it was bought up by a hedge funder, a fellow named Peterson. A much smarter collector in the long run." Patricia hung up the phone, her mind reeling. Sibylla hadn't just built an empire. He had done it by secretly selling off its foundation. His entire persona was a lie built on a legacy he himself had dismantled and sold for parts. And the crowning irony, the centerpiece of her own acclaimed discovery, the Gentileschi masterpiece, the Sleeping Venus of de Vega, she now realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity that she had outbid that very same hedge fund manager, Peterson, to acquire it for her Spanish clients. She had unknowingly prevented the greatest piece of all from falling into the hands of the man who held the rest of Sibylla's family legacy. She now held all the cards. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. This was about his entire identity. And she knew exactly how she was going to play her hand. The endgame was not a dramatic confrontation in a boardroom or a shouting match in a public place. Patricia's final move was one of quiet, devastating precision, executed on her own terms in her own space. She orchestrated it through Leo. He sent a single formal letter to Sibylla's legal team. The letter stated that Ms. Patricia Chatsworth was in possession of information regarding the sale of the Alistair Pierce collection and was prepared to make this information available to key financial reporters and business biographers. It also stated that she had a final proposal to discuss with Mr. Pierce and that he was to meet her at her gallery alone at 9 o'clock the following evening. Sibylla arrived at the appointed time, stepping into the silent, beautifully lit gallery. The space, empty of its usual throng, felt like a cathedral. Patricia was waiting for him in the main exhibition hall, standing before the explosive, vibrant painting that was the centerpiece of her Resurgence collection. She was dressed simply in black trousers and a silk blouse, her hands in her pockets. She looked completely at ease, a queen in her court. "Sibylla," she said, not turning to look at him. "Thank you for coming. Your lawyer's letter was compelling," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed rage. "What is this, Patricia? Blackmail? Blackmail is such an ugly word," she said, finally turning to face him. Her expression was calm, almost placid. "I prefer to think of it as a final acquisition. I'm simply acquiring the last thing I need from you, your permanent absence from my life and my daughter's." She gestured to a small table where a stack of folders lay. "I know about the collection. Sibylla, your grandfather's collection. I know you sold it off piece by piece to fund your first big gamble. You sold your heritage to build a house of cards. How do you think your investors, the ones who bought into the Pierce family legacy, will feel when they learn that the legacy is a hollowed-out shell? He paled. She had him, and they both knew it. His entire brand was built on a foundation of generational wealth and stability. The revelation that he was just another gambler who'd cashed in his family jewels would shatter that image and likely trigger a crisis of confidence in his already struggling company. "What do you want?" he finally rasped. "It's very simple," she said, walking toward him, her steps echoing on the polished floor. You are going to sign a legally binding document which my brother has already drafted. It will reinforce the fact that you have no paternal claim to Rosalind now or ever. It will include a strict proximity clause stating that you will not come within 500 feet of her, her school, or our home. You will cease all contact, direct or indirect. You will effectively cease to exist in our world. And in return, he asked, his jaw clenched. In return, she said, stopping just a few feet from him, the provenance records of your grandfather's collection remain my private research. I have no interest in ruining you, Sibylla. I have no interest in you at all. Your success or failure is completely irrelevant to me. I just want you gone. He stared at her, a maelstrom of emotions warring in his eyes, fury, humiliation, and a dawning, horrified respect. He had created this woman. His cruelty, his betrayal had been the crucible that had forged this unbreakable, brilliant adversary. He had discarded her, and in doing so, had engineered his own defeat. And what about Kendra? He sneered, a last pathetic attempt to wound her. I suppose you'll enjoy watching her leave me when the money finally runs out. Patricia almost smiled. Honestly, Sibylla, I haven't thought about Kendra Lowe in 5 years. Your relationships are your own business. They have nothing to do with me. It was the final, perfect cut. She felt nothing for them. Not jealousy, not hatred. Nothing. They were a footnote in a book she had long since finished reading. He stood there for a long moment, defeated. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the bitter taste of ashes. He walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed the documents without reading them. He knew Leo's work would be ironclad. He placed the pen down and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her, a ghost in the beautiful world she had built. Was it worth it, Patricia? He asked, his voice hollow. All this. She looked around her magnificent gallery at the powerful art that lined the walls and thought of her daughter sleeping safely in their beautiful home. She thought of her work, her purpose, her peace. It was worth everything, she said. And then she turned her back on him, returning her gaze to the art, leaving him to walk out into the night alone. The news broke 6 months later. Pierce Global Properties, over-leveraged and unable to secure new financing, was forced into a massive restructuring. Sibylla Pierce was ousted as CEO. Kendra Lowe, true to his prediction, had left him weeks before her social media suddenly filled with pictures of her on a yacht with an aging tech billionaire. Sibylla stripped of his power, and his wealth faded into obscurity. Patricia read the news on her iPad one morning while having breakfast with Rosalind. She felt a brief, distant flicker of something, not triumph, not pity, but closure. She closed the article, put her tablet aside, and went back to helping her daughter decide whether her teddy bear wanted to wear a crown or a pirate hat to their tea party. Her empire wasn't built of glass and steel, it was built of love, resilience, and beautiful things. And it was just beginning. That is the incredible story of Patricia Chatsworth. It's a story that proves that the greatest revenge isn't loud and destructive, but quiet, brilliant, and constructive. She didn't set out to destroy the man who broke her. She set out to build a world so magnificent that he no longer had a place in it. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire is a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It's a reminder that our greatest creations can often rise from our deepest pain. If you were inspired by Patricia's story of resilience and empowerment, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild stronger than ever before. And for more stories of incredible transformations and inspiring journeys, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Thank you for listening.